This video will provide instructions for the assembly and installation of Gulf Copper's wire rope cable connector system. We offer assembly classes at our Galveston, Texas facility, or we can travel to your location. We believe our cable connectors are your best solution for restringing wire rope on drilling rigs or in other remote locations. For safety, our cable connectors are designed to be used one time and then discarded. The current sizes offered include 5/8 inch for messenger wire, 1.5 inch, 1 5/8 inch, 1 3/4 inch, and 2 inches. Parts can be ordered in different configurations. If you need additional items, please check with your purchasing department. These are the tools and parts required: 2 3-inch diameter hose clamps, a 4-inch electric grinder, 4 by 1/8 inch grinding cutting discs, 10-inch pry bars, 2-pound hammer, 10-inch pliers, 1 wire wedge tool, torque tool, torque socket, 1 1/2 inch by 1 inch drive, torque wrench with 1 inch drive, capable of at least 450 foot-pounds, 1 metal wedge, 1 can of brake cleaner or similar solvent, 1 grease pencil, 2 pieces of key stock, a table vise, and 2 optional items that may be helpful: a 6-inch piece of pipe that is 3/4 inches in diameter if needed to drive connector over center wire, and a roll of duct tape in case you cannot find an assistant. Never attempt this job without the appropriate personal protective equipment, including at least hard hat, face shield, safety glasses, hearing protection, and gloves. Here are the various parts of our cable connectors. Each connector is marked with a batch number. Each connector end has the following parts: a chain end with pin, a cable end with brass wire wedge. Note the set screw for the chain pin with never seize applied. 2 5-foot lengths of chain, and the swivel assembly with pins and set screws between the 2 lengths of chain. The swivel assembly will prevent the cable from twisting and tangling when in use. Here are the assembly instructions. First, inspect the cable for any stretched or broken sections within 1 foot of the end of the cable. If any damage is observed, then cut the cable back until there is at least 1 foot of undamaged cable. If a torch is used to cut the cable, you must use a grinder to remove the burned surface. Put the cable end in the vise with a minimum of 10 inches extending above the vise jaws. Measure 4 1/2 inches from the end of the cable, and mark the cable all the way around with your grease pencil. Now, measure 5 1/2 inches from the top of the cable end, and mark all the way around with your grease pencil. Take a 3-inch hose clamp and drop it over the cable. Secure the clamp over the lower circle, 5 1/2 inches below the cable end. Using a pry bar, start to separate outer cable bands one at a time. Cut off each of the outer bands at the 4 1/2 inch mark using a 4-inch grinder and cutting disc. It is critical that you do not touch the inner core of the main cable with the cutting disc. Complete this for all remaining outer bands. After the top 4 1/2 inches of outer bands have been removed, inspect the inner core. If you cut into the core, you must go back to the first step of the assembly instructions. Next, grind a 45-degree bevel on the remaining outer bands. This will help with the assembly of the bottom part of the cable connector by allowing it to be driven over the outer bands. Here you see the beveled edge, and again, note there is no damage to the cable's inner core. Now, grind the same 45-degree bevel on the end of the inner core. Before assembling the connector, clean the cable with solvent to remove cable grease. Then slide the cable connector over the core cable with the threaded end of the connector up toward the end of the cable. Drive the cable connector over the outer bands until a minimum of 1 1/2 inches of the core is above the top of the cable connector. Mark the center strand of the core cable. Separate the core's outer bands and arrange them evenly around the core. Now, clean the outer bands with solvent. After it is cleaned, slide the wedge over the center strand with the small end of the wedge going over the cable first. Drive the wedge down with the wedge driving tool until the wedge stops. Measure from the top of the cable connector to the top of the core's outer strands, 1 1/8 inch. Mark this measurement all the way around. Now, grind off the remaining section of cable. Do not grind the center strand. Double check your cut, and if the outer strands are 1 1/8 inches above the connector, you can proceed by removing the hose clamp. Now, you will need to reposition the cable so that the cable connector is in the vise using the key stocks on the machined edge of the connector. If you do not have an assistant, you can use duct tape to temporarily secure the key stocks to the connector. Then secure the cable connector in the vise, applying pressure to the key stocks. Place a hose clamp around the loose ends of the cable in the connector to pull the strands back together above the wedge. Once the strands are together, place the connector cap over the cable ends. Then you can remove the hose clamp. Now screw on the cable connector cap. Then tighten it with a special socket and torque wrench until it reaches 300 foot-pounds. Please be aware that all 1 1/2 inch, 1 5/8 inch, 1 3/4 inch, and 2 inch connectors must have a small gap between the two halves after torquing to 300 foot-pounds. If there is no gap, disassemble and repeat assembly process, as the cable has evidently pushed down and torque is not on the wedge. Therefore, cable failure could occur. Thanks for watching this training program, as your safety is our top priority. If you have any questions regarding the cable connector, please contact your local technical field support team.